there was one individual that, they were doing the thing and they said, oh, bloody hell, why don't they put that button there? It would make so much more sense. And that was the insight where we realized, like everyone else was doing it this way, but we needed to do it this way because it made the experience better. Now, that one little raw, like you said, raw insights, authentic story is so much more powerful than 78% responded to it this way. It's just that one little story that is so powerful.
Welcome to Insights Unlocked, an original podcast from User Testing, where we bring you candid conversations and stories with the thinkers, doers, and builders behind some of the most successful digital products and experiences in the world, from concept to execution.
Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Principal Content Marketing Manager at User Testing, and our guest today is Gabrielle Dolan. Gabrielle is a global expert on business storytelling and the author of multiple books, including Story Intelligence, The Craft of Authentic Storytelling Made Smarter with AI. She helps leaders and organizations communicate more effectively by using authentic stories to build trust, connect emotionally, and inspire action. Welcome to the show, Gabrielle.
Hi, Nathan. I'm excited to be here with you to talk all things storytelling.
As I was saying in the introduction there, you're a leading voice on storytelling in business, but that was not where your career started. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into this work and what made you realize that storytelling is such a powerful tool in business?
Yeah, no, you're right. My career did not start there. In fact, my career started way back as a trainee mainframe computer operator. So that's showing my age. I'm not even sure if they have mainframe computers anymore. So I did start in technology back in the mid 80s. And I worked in corporate Australia, and I was probably in corporate Australia for about 20 years. And it was in the last couple of years I had evolved into change management roles. So it was actually still in technology. So rolling out the technology to the, business units and to the organization. And it was in those roles, in the capacity as a change manager and in leadership roles, that I sort of started to experiment with storytelling. And I started to notice that the very good leaders were sharing stories, the brilliant presenters were sharing stories. So I started to experiment myself in those change management roles. And what I found is it tended to get the message across, and I was better able to influence, the change or the, messages around the change. So it was about 21 years ago, I decided that storytelling is a skill. It's a leadership skill. It's a communication skill. It's an influencing skill. And because I'd had a bit of experience in designing and delivering leadership programs, I sort of thought, maybe I could teach people how to tell stories. And that was 21 years ago. It was a bit of an uphill battle way back then, but it'd be fair to say it's worked out.
And with all that's 20 years plus of working on this, tinkering on it and stuff like that. And that's led to this book then.
Yeah.
And can you just tell us what is Story Intelligence?
Yeah, so this is actually the 8th book I've written on communication and storytelling. And my previous book was 5 years ago, and I was totally convinced that would be my last book on storytelling. But what I found, Nathan, is, this was about 18 months ago, and I would be running storytelling workshops as I do, and I'd have more and more people ask me, will AI replace storytelling? And I was sort of horrified by the question. It was like, no, AI won't replace storytelling. But then I had people say, can you use AI to help with stories? And initially my reaction was like, no, that's cheating. You can't do that. That won't be real. But I thought I should experiment with it, and I realized that you could use AI. So hence the title of the book, Story Intelligence, The Craft of Authentic Storytelling Made Smarter with AI. Ultimately, it is still a storytelling book. So it is still ultimately a storytelling book. And I liked the title of it, Story Intelligence, because I think it linked quite nicely to emotional intelligence. but there was no definition of what story intelligence was. So I had to craft a definition. And what I came up with is the ability to purposefully and skillfully use authentic storytelling to communicate with clarity and to connect, engage, and inspire. And some people go, that's way too long of a description. I was like, well, whatever. But I think the key things here is purposefully and skillfully use storytelling, and it's got to be authentic. And the whole reason we're doing it is to help us communicate with clarity, but actually to connect and engage and inspire, whether that's our employees or our customers or potential customers. That's what we're using storytelling for.
Here at User Testing, we connect companies with their audiences to try and get customer feedback. We record those sessions. These are think aloud, so as people engage with your product or service, whether it's online or even in real life, and those clips are then used. And what we found is that there's a lot of power in having those voices, and I think that gets at what you were just saying. The authenticity of it, right? Hearing your actual customers trying to do what you think they're going to do. And I'm just wondering, like, what advice do you have, as for leaders, for people within their organizations who want to use storytelling to turn those sort of insights, that raw stuff, the anecdotes you hear from the field, or from customer support, how do you turn those into stories that will then later influence the organization?
Yeah, that's a really powerful one. And your question around user testing brought me way back to I was probably doing that 30 years ago, getting in a room, getting people, and they're doing things, and you had to keep going, no, think out loud. We want to hear what you're thinking. So those insights are really powerful, because can you imagine a lot of the time what we do is, we do all this user testing, and we'll draw data from that. It was like, so 78% of users tested did this or whatever. Okay, which is fine. But the real powerful one, and this could be leaders or it could be anyone saying, in user testing, there was one individual that, they were doing the thing and they said, oh, bloody hell, why don't they put that button there? It would make so much more sense. And that was the insight where we realized, like everyone else was doing it this way, but we needed to do it this way because it made the experience better. Now, that one little raw, like you said, raw insights, authentic story is so much more powerful than 78%, responded to it this way. It's just that one little story that is so powerful. And the insights from those user testing, they could be used by leaders in the organization to drive the change, but they could also be used to, customer facing staff to sell a product. I mean, how powerful would a story like that be when you walk into a whatever and there's all these various products around, and the service person is just telling you a little story like that you sort of go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And the other cool thing that when you're hearing a story like that is like, wow, they've put a lot of thought and effort into this, and it's all about the customer. But that story gives credibility around the message, as opposed to, we're all about customer service and we responded to blah, blah percent of whatever.
And as you're telling that, I'm reminded of a story I've been sharing on different interviews about how a customer, it turns out it's a great way. I say, oh yeah, we connect big companies with their customers and they get insights, and like, what does that really mean? And then I got into just telling the story of a company that stocks their product in big box stores, but it's a big box that their product comes in, and the way the stores always shelved it, they actually turned it on its side, so the customers were not seeing that. And so once they had the customers going, like, why is nobody buying our product at Walmart or wherever we're going? It's because they're seeing only the side of the box, which is just some print. And so they realized this and realized that, the constraints of the stores and stuff like that. So they moved the front of their box, essentially, all that beautiful artwork and design, over to the side of the box where it's actually being seen now. And then all of a sudden, bam, sales improved, whatever percent. but it was just that insight of like, oh, we 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 had all these people spending all this time and energy designing something to look really pretty, but when we actually saw how people were using, how it's out there in the world, we realized how we should be doing things differently. But it's a great. I'm thinking now. There's obviously you would coach me to say tell that story in a better way, Nathan. Yes, that's true. All my years, even when I was a journalist trying to tell stories. But it's also a great way to just kind of tell the bigger story, right? And show one little example to get to the bigger story.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. That one tiny little example of what I was in a store and I watched a customer walk by because they couldn't even see the whole product because we had the marketing. And it's just literally one story that could then change the whole design of something. So yeah, it's people sort of think we need data. We need all this data. No, we need to do more testing. It's actually that one example, and people go, "Oh, that's pretty obvious, isn't it?" And that's all it needs is one story, and the story gives it credibility. People aren't going, "Well, how many other people did that?" It was just that one story works.
And you can just think like all the billions of dollars that was involved in that process, right? And they're like, "Oh, why are sales flat? They're blah, 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 blah." And you're like, oh my gosh. Anyway.
We sell more block. I often, Nathan, a lot of people, organizations spend a lot of money on doing employee engagement surveys and they test everyone and want to find out what the culture's really like. And I literally say, why don't you just go and sit in the cafeteria or the canteen or what the equivalent and just listen to the stories going on? You'd be able to get a really good idea of what the culture's like by hearing a few stories around.
Yeah. Or, and how do you do that virtually, right? If you're running a big corporation but there are ways to do that. It really means making the time and not having the all hands meeting and then have everyone on screen say, well, all right, who has a question now?
Who has a question? Any feedback? No.
Yeah, any feedback? No. I don't want to be called out. I don't trust anybody here.
It's genuinely like understanding that these are important and then making the time and then really truly listening to what you're hearing.
The something you mentioned in the book is this, the curse of knowledge, where something feels obvious to us but isn't clear to our audience. Why is this such a common communication challenge for leaders, and how can storytelling help bridge that gap?
Yeah, so the curse of knowledge is literally that. Like once you know something, like it seems really obvious to you and you explain it and like, why don't they get it? I mean, anyone with kids has experienced this on a daily basis. Like how many times do I have to tell you? There's a great quote from George Bernard Shaw, and he said the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion it has taken place. And this happens on a daily basis, whether it is with our kids or with at work, where, people go, well, you never told us that. And you're going, you were at the meeting last week. We discussed this, or this is the third email I've sent. So normally people get really frustrated by it, and it is frustrating. I was like, why don't they get it? They weren't listening. They weren't paying attention. But the reality is, if we are doing the communication, it is our job to help them get it. And if they're not getting it, we have to change the way we communicate. And a story is really powerful. If I might illustrate this with an example, so share a story. I did some work with a risk team. So it was the entire risk team, and the head of risk, her name was Rosemary. And Rosemary said to me, one of the biggest challenges I have is that when I'm working with the business units that I support and risk is raised, they sort of look at me and go, you're the risk manager, that's your job. And she said, it doesn't matter how many times I've told them, I cannot manage your own risk. I can only help you manage the risk. I can only provide the skills and advice for you to manage your risk. She said, I've given case study after case study, example after example of the benefits of managing your own risk, the consequences of not. She goes, nothing has worked. So she's really experiencing this curse of knowledge. Why don't they get it? She had tried everything except a personal story. And I think some of the most powerful stories are the non-work related stories attached to a work message. The work stories absolutely still work. So let me share the story that she started to use to great effect. And I'll ask you a few questions afterwards to help you experience, I guess, the power of story. So when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. And growing up on a farm, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but Mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do when we came across redback spiders in the timber heap. We knew about all the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain, and we knew what to do if we came across a snake in summer. And I remember this day I was running down to get my bike from the front gate, and then I just froze because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything Mum taught us to do. So I played statues, and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake, and I ran back to the house to tell Mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, knowledge, and advice. So when you come across your own copperhead snake, regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do. So, Nathan, let me ask you a couple of questions. Does that story help you understand the message better? So does it help you understand the message around risk management and the role you play in risk management?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It gives me that framework on how do I encounter something, what I should be doing. What are the next steps I should do when I face that situation, right?
Yeah. So the story helps you understand the message better. So this is coming back to the definition of story intelligence, to communicate with clarity. Will you remember that story? Do you think you'll remember that story?
I'll probably tell that story to my kids tonight at dinner.
Okay, so you've answered my next question. You will remember it, and I can talk a little bit about why our brain remembers stories. But the third question is, could you retell that story without losing its meaning? And you've literally just said that you will tell your kids that story. So when you think about when we're communicating, the real challenges we have, do people really understand what we're saying? Like really understand it? Can they remember it? So when the meeting's over, the presentation's finished, the discussion has ended, can they actually remember that message? And if they had to, could they retell it to others without losing the meaning? And a story will give you traction on those three things. So just like you'll share that story now with your kids, because, hey, it's teaching them a life skill about snakes. Like, it's sort of not about risk management, but it is about risk management. Can you imagine the power of these stories when you've got a story that happened like in user testing, for example, we were talking about before, but it's such a great story that a leader has shared or the marketing team have shared that the frontline customer-facing people can reshare it because they understand, remember, and can retell it.
What about the pushback you get from people who say, I don't have a story, right? Do I have to just steal her, growing up on a farm story? How do we recognize stories? How do we know how do we turn an anecdote into a story?
Yeah. So a lot of people, when I run my workshops, they go, "Oh my God, I love that story so much." It was like, but I didn't grow up on a farm, and it was like, okay, so we're just not stealing that story, or we're not making up story, but it could spark other stories. So you might not have grown up at a farm, but your parents might have told you about stranger danger, for example. You might have you could have gone on a safari through Africa, and the guide gave you all these safety instructions. I mean, we've all been in a place where we've been given safety instructions. I mean, even a plane, on a car. So it could spark your own story. But I do have people sort of say, I don't have any stories. What they're saying to me is, I don't have any big, amazing climbing Mount Everest, surviving cancer type stories. And I said, it's not about that. I mean, good on you if you've climbed Mount Everest, but they're not overly relatable. So it's the day-to-day story. So it's helping people understand that the day-to-day stories, almost to the point where you're sort of going, why would anyone be interested in that? They're the most powerful stories, and they're the most relatable, and I get to know you a little bit better. So I do work through a process of helping people find those stories to the message, and then once they share, I get them to share it, and once they share it, and people are going, wow, that was, I connected to it. So that's the whole point. Again, going back to the story intelligence definition, it's you got to connect, engage, and inspire, and the point is, our human brain is wired to connect to not only the story, but to connect to the storyteller as well.
Is that kind of what you found too? I recall you mentioning that you tested AI stories. They can come up with a story really well. And you have these other stories that you have. But the people trusted the human stories more. They connected emotionally more with the human stories than the AI stories. Is that difference? What is that? What do
Yeah,
you think?
that was so when I first started to, when people sort of said, would AI replace storytelling? And like I went, no, it won't. I sort of thought, if I'm the so-called expert in storytelling, I should like start exploring this. And I'd ask, ChatGPT, Claude, what, the platforms I was using, can you come up with a personal story to share around risk management? And I actually used a risk management one because I thought, let's see if it's as good as my snake story. And I was disturbingly concerned about how good it was. And so it came back and I went, well, this is actually pretty good, but it was missing something. And what it was missing was, well, it was missing authenticity because it wasn't true, but it was missing, it's just like something doesn't feel right. And that's every time I hear an AI story, it's like something doesn't feel quite right. So I actually, as part of the book, tested my hypothesis that AI created stories were good, okay, but they weren't engaging and they didn't feel real. So yeah, I came up with 6 different topics. I wrote a story for each one of those topics. So there were 6 stories from me, and I got ChatGPT and Claude to come up with stories. So there was 18 stories in total. And then I asked people to rate them on all these different things. And, most of the time my stories were rated higher. In one occasion it wasn't, which was a bit of an ego hit to me. But the real results proved what I was trying to achieve. That in my stories, the difference between clarity, as in the story made sense, and the story felt real, were pretty much equal. In the AI stories, clarity was rated high, as in the story made sense and I could get the message, but did it feel real and did I connect with it was really low. So that's what I mean. There was something missing. I spoke to a lot of people that did the testing for me, and the AI ones, they were saying things like, it just felt cliche, it didn't feel real, it felt too good to be true, that type of stuff. And so yeah, so you can use AI, but you just don't want to just take an AI generated story and go, well, that sounds good, and use it as your own.
Well, I think to the extent that I was going to steal the farm story, right? I think I'm at risk of that feeling not authentic as well, right? I can't tell that story, but I can find my own story that's similar to that. And be able to share that with my kids, right? I can tell the story from the perspective of a Navy submariner, which is my story. I can tell that story and tell about all the risks that are involved and what you do when you encounter risk. And here are some steps, stop, walk back. This is true in life. Everything, right? Stop, walk back.
Stop, walk back. And you're right, Nathan. Like I still, when I run workshops with leaders, there will still be some leaders that go, but if the story's believable and made up, like, no harm done. And I often go back and go, say if you heard Rosemary share her snake story and afterwards you went, oh, I really loved your story about the snake. I grew up on a farm too. Where did you grow up? And she said, oh, I made that up. All right, I grew up in the city. So she's now told you the story's made up. Where's her credibility? Like, some people say it's just a little white lie. I go, that's more than a little white lie. It actually feels more than a lie. What it feels like is a betrayal. Like, it feels like a betrayal of trust. It feels like manipulation. So, and I always say, why would you make up stories when you've got so many of your own stories that you can share really authentically? Why would you make them up? So, part of my training is showing people that you've got the stories, and your stories are so much more powerful than any made up or exaggerated story.
And it might be this imposter syndrome where I don't have any interesting stories, and you just have to. Maybe this is. I was going to lead into my next question. I want to know if we should avoid, if we can, using AI to come up with our stories. How do we use AI in developing our stories?
Yeah. So again, look, as part of the book, I thought I better test this and see what works. And what I've found is, I think the most authentic and effective way to use AI is as your creative partner. So, for example, Nathan, say you were, we were sitting down and having a coffee, and you said, "Oh, I've got this big presentation next week, and it's all around innovation, and I hear what you say, sharing a personal story will help, but I just can't think of any story." Now, I would work you through a process, and the first thing I would say is, well, what does innovation mean to you? So helping you get really clear. And then I would start to ask you all these questions like, well, you might go, innovation means to me challenging the status quo, or whatever. So I would be saying, so where does that come from? Where have you experienced that before? Is that something your parents instilled in you, or you had a teacher? Where have you challenged the status quo? Where have you not challenged the status quo? So when have you not had the courage to do it? And I would start to ask you all these questions. I guarantee you 100% you would think of an example. You'd go, oh yeah, actually that I do remember a time when, and you would think of an example. So use AI for that. Literally use AI to say, act as my storytelling coach. I've got to give a presentation around innovation next week. Ask me questions that will help me uncover some stories. And so it will ask you all these questions. I guarantee you'll think of a story. Then, now this is when you've got to be really careful. Then AI will say, just give me a few, bullet points and, roughly what happened. And it creates a story. So you do that, and it comes back and this story appears. Now, the temptation is to go, oh, that sounds good. But you've got to go, it might sound good, but does it sound like you? And actually, is it true? So sometimes AI will, it's making up stuff, right? It will say, this happened and I felt really nervous about it. And you go, actually, I didn't feel nervous. I actually felt really excited. Okay, fine. So say I was super excited, blah, 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 right? So you were changing it. And if it's got words in it or phrases that you wouldn't use, you have to change that. So don't give up creative control to AI. I use AI, and I had to come up with a couple of paragraphs about what I did, and one of the things was I teach people to communicate more effectively through stories, something like that. And it came back and said, I teach people how to communicate more effectively through stories that bridge the gap between impact and trust. And I'm thinking, what the hell does that mean? It's just like, but I think a real trap when we're using AI for content creation is it can be really efficient, so it can help us generate content faster, but you don't want to lose it being effective in that. So I think use it as your creative partner, but don't ever let it take control.
Yeah, read it out loud.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I say, Nathan. Just read it out loud, and if you're stumbling over the word or you go, oh God, that sounds a bit weird, then change it.
Yeah, well, I mean, because sometimes you read it on screen and like, oh yeah, that sounds really smart, and then you read it out loud and you're like, what the heck am I actually saying there?
Yeah. So I think it's a real trap where we will go, oh, that sounds good. That sounds smart. Yeah. Bridge the gap between impact and trust. That sounds so smart. It's like, but I don't even know what it means.
So, when, leaders are trying to bring this into their organizations, when product teams or marketing teams are trying to do this, what's your advice for getting started? Like, maybe it's a chicken and egg story. Do they start with a story, or do they start with their problems and then try and find the story that kind of helps explain that? How do they get started?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two ways. It's storytelling is really popular at the moment. Everyone's going, oh, we need to tell our stories better. We need to get better at telling stories. It's an absolute skill. So it's like anything, if you get trained, if you learn more about it, you're going to get better at it. So, I know I may be completely biased because this is what I do as a job, but if you want to get better if you want to bring storytelling into your organization and you realize it's really powerful, you need to train people how to do it well, how to share it more effectively, and how to find them. So that's having said that. But when it comes to storytelling, and this is the advice I give people, you've always got to start with the message. So like you said, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Why Why aren't they getting this? Why, helping them unpack the curse of knowledge. What is the real message you're trying to get across? And then find stories for that, and find both the personal stories and the professional stories. But it always comes back to, what's the real message? So I find, I've been involved in rolling out technical change and for 30 plus years, and I think one of the mistakes we make is like, no, well, we want to get across the message why this change is so great and why we need it, and the improvements we're going to get and how it's going to be better for the customer. So we have all stories around that, and I just say, just back up a minute. What do you think your employees are feeling right now? And that's when they go, well, they're probably thinking, here we go again, another change. They're probably thinking, there's nothing wrong with the old system. So it's like, okay, well, maybe have a story around that first before we go into the benefits of the change. So I think sometimes we sort of don't want to raise their issues, but a story is really impactful then.
It goes back to having those conversations with your customers and understanding your problems, right? And identifying, and not just having your opinions on what their problems might be. As I'm thinking about this, okay.
Yeah. I mean, you do. Yeah. Like, when I go in and sell storytelling into organizations, it's a good idea to go into and have a very good idea of what their problems are, because as I say to anyone, if you're not selling anything to anyone, if you're not solving their problems, and I do have a pretty good idea of what their problems were, and I have stories for when they come up and when they're raised. I have stories to show that I understand that was their problem. That's their problem, and how I've helped in solving it.
How do you? So you have stories, and you have many stories. How do you sort of index that library? How do you know? Here's my risk avoidance story, and here's my just go for it story.
Yeah. So there's different ways, but this might surprise a lot of people, because I truly do love storytelling, but I also truly do love an Excel spreadsheet. I've combined my two loves, and I call it my storytelling spreadsheet. And if you literally, it can be a thing of, these are all the messages I need to get across. And then you can go, well, what's a personal story I could share, as in a non-work related, and then what's a work related story I can share. And it could be, whether you do an Excel spreadsheet or just a notebook, but you do sort of have to start to capture the stories. You could also see, sometimes when you realize how powerful these stories are, you could be, something could happen to you today at gym or walking in the park, and you could go, oh, that's a great example of teamwork, or that's a great example of innovation. So then you go, I could use that story, or I could replace that story. Now that's sort of capturing your stories. And of course, there's a whole framework of how you start your stories, what you put in the middle, and most importantly, how you end their stories, so they're told really succinctly and effective.
I was just going to ask about that. As I'm recalling, like, those big keynote personalities, right? At all the conferences, what we don't realize is that they spend countless hours and hours and hours practicing how to tell that anecdotal story about their big presentation, and how they tweak the words here or there just a little bit, to get a laugh track at this point in time,
Yep.
or and how they just wait or have use silence before the next thing they say, or whatever it might be, for a point to sink in. That's all. You do all that from practice. But if you're just starting out, what's your advice for someone who's listening to this episode and they want to take that first step? What should they do?
Okay, but so my advice is, when you start to share your stories, make sure they're super succinct. So my guidance is around about 60 seconds, 90 seconds. There's some brilliant stories, like you could tell stories in 30 seconds, absolutely. But if you're telling a story and it's going for 2 minutes or longer, people are starting to think, get to the point. Now, they may not be saying get to the point, but they're well and truly thinking get to the point. So keep it super succinct. Start with time and place. as in, do not start with "let me tell you a story," because when people go "let me tell you a story," it's like, oh, please don't, because we conjure up all these stories that have gone for so long. The most effective way to start your story is with time and place. So, this morning at gym, I saw this guy. It's like right in, so, and, you don't need any more than a sentence there. People sort of tend to feel they need to add lots more context into their stories. But it's if you keep your story succinct and if you start well, and then there's a real skill to ending it, especially when you're using a non-work related story and bringing it back in. It's sort of got to be respectful, and you got to guide them to the message without knocking them on the head with it. So you don't want to end your story with the moral of the story is.
Right. I mentioned I used to be a newspaper reporter, and one of my editors once said, "Nathan, if you have to tell me that it's ironic, it wasn't ironic." So
yeah, it's like, if you have to tell me a joke's funny, it's not a funny.
Yeah,
and the ending is sort of like the punchline of a joke. If you stuff it up or you forget it or you're like, it doesn't work. The joke doesn't work.
But maybe you can use that also as a tool in a situation where because everyone's going to tell that story later on, how Nathan bombed at telling this story. So maybe there is a way to use that. I don't know. And definitely we can tell from my examples that I do need work on my storytelling. So Gabrielle, I appreciate your time today. I enjoyed our conversation. How does someone learn more about you, your thought leadership, and where can they and I go to get a copy of your book?
Yeah, so the book's available globally on all online bookstores. Just do a search for that. I'm very active on LinkedIn for people on LinkedIn, so Gabrielle Dolan, and I also run my own podcast. So if you like listening to podcasts, which you clearly do because you're listening to Nathan right now, it's called Keeping It Real with Jack and Ral, and I'm the Ral of that duo, and we release an episode every Monday just on all, career advice and things like that. So they're the three best places to get find out more about me.
Perfect. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nathan.